So this little segment's about data collection tools, and if you listen to the previous video, this is really probably mainly focusing on external sources of data, but a little bit about IoT as well. So data collection tools are, as they sound, tools that collect data. And I'm not making a bit of a joke out of it, but it's actually really important to think through, if you're buying a data collection tool and licensing a data collection tool, there's a lot that can go wrong. I'll walk through some examples of data collection tools in terms of categories, and then we'll talk through some examples about what they are. So the first sort of data collection concept is web scraping. Now, what that basically means is, as it sounds, scraping a page of the internet, of the web. The internet has got loads of information. It can be really useful if you want to get information about companies or services or products. And therefore, going out to the internet and taking that information because it's in the public domain seems okay. It's problem number one from a procurement and commercial perspective is that most of those pages are copyrighted, or they've got terms and conditions on the website that say you shouldn't be taking copies of that information for use or for any other use. So before you start going through web scraping tools, just have a think about what you're going to scrape. Make sure the sources of data are low risk, that no one's going to sort of do you for copyright or any other sort of problems with that data. And also make sure that they're reliable and good sources of data. There's quite a lot of crap on the internet, as you're probably all aware. So, you don't want to be scraping the sort of pages you don't want to be associated with data in your organization. Now, there's quite a few sort of free or very cheap web scraping tools out there. One called Scrapy, S-C-R-A-P-Y. That's probably the most commonly used. That's open source. It's very easy to access. You sign up to it, and then it lets you do pretty much what you want. There's a little bit of technology required. You need to do a bit of coding to make it work. But fundamentally, that is a good tool that can manage a lot of the scraping that you need. A couple of others you might have heard of, a company called Octopass, another one called Import.io, and quite a lot of free, you can code your own web scraping tools for next to nothing. But like I say, it does get a bit complicated, and certainly on some of the bigger websites that you're accessing, there are plenty of tools on people's websites to try and spot if someone's doing lots and lots of scrapes of their data and therefore protect the website. So in some cases you might get red flagged, your company might get red flagged for misuse of a website or whatever that you're scraping. So web scraping comes with risk, and from a procurement perspective you need to make sure if your company is doing web scraping, if you're buying a tool, you understand the terms and the sources of data you're going to use. The second one is a very common and probably got a long way to go in terms of longevity of the technology technique, which is called APIs, or Advanced Programming Interface. And what that is, it's a piece of code that effectively you can send a request to a website or a company and say, please give me this information. And they'll say, here it is. And it's just that simple. You ask a question and it will send you the answer back. So a good example, and a free example, is Companies House. I actually use Companies House API quite a lot. And basically you set up the API within an application that you've got, and you say, please tell me who the directors are of Embedded IT Limited, and it will come back with me. So it's that sort of simple API interface, comes back in a structured form, makes it very easy to consume. APIs are very cool. There are a lot of free API services out there. Companies House being a good example, and there are also some others which are a bit more expensive. Now, the higher value ones can get very expensive, and you tend to pay per API, so API call. So if I ask Companies House, the directors of my company, it'll come back, that's free, that's great. Similarly, I've got a similar interface to a credit checking organization, and so I say, right, give me the credit reference for Embedded IT Limited. It'll come back and it'll charge me 10p, made up number, but 10p. If that doesn't sound like a lot of money, I have got quite a lot of data in my organization. If I made that call 400,000 times, it would cost me £40,000. So APIs, from a procurement perspective, are really good, useful, legal, easy to contract interface services for data collection, but they can get very costly very, very quickly if you have to pay for them. Most organizations will allow you to buy in batches of calls. So you'll end up, if you commit to making 10,000 API calls, you'll get a discounted rate. Make sure you get the right forecast from your IT team to understand what you're going to go with that. Some of the sort of big tools you might hear of in the context of API, Postman is probably the biggest one. I think that's relatively cost effective. It's a platform-based service that allows you to manage your APIs. There's a product called Apigee, A-P-I-G-E-E from Google, does the same sort of thing. There's something called Swagger. There's plenty of software out there that does API management. And by API management, I mean just doing some of the things I just warned you about. So making sure that you're being sensible about the volumes and the amount of time you're using that API. The other thing about APIs, again, if you make 1 million calls in a second, you're likely to get blocked by the organization. So you need to understand what your volume and throughput of API calls is going to be when you're buying those sorts of services. The final sort of data collection thing I mentioned in the previous video relates to Internet of Things devices or sensors. Now, in your organization, there might be sensors that are doing certain things, monitoring certain processes. Outside in the real world, there are plenty of IoT devices that will sell you what they're picking up for a fee. And again, same sort of problem with APIs. You need to understand from a commercial perspective, A, that you're accessing information that is relevant to your business and can be used by your business in the way that you want it to be used. And secondly, that the commercial construct is appropriate for the amount of money you want to spend. Same sort of problem with APIs. If you access the IoT device, say, right, okay, what's the temperature in Sweden right now? That might be free from the Met Office. It might be 10p per call. If you do that once a second for a long time, that fee is going to rack up quickly. So it's all about volume forecasting, understanding the commercial constructs, and making sure you've got a good wrapper and controls in place to not overcook some of those data collection calls. But data collection is a really common thing. It's going to get a lot more common. There's also a potential, if your organization generates some really good data, you could sell your own data via an API to other people. So the trading of data between companies is becoming a lot more common, a lot more easy to access, but therefore comes with commercial risk around what you're using the data for and how much you're going to pay for it. That's all I'll say on data collection for now, mainly focused on externals. We'll dive into the next section and see what we can find out there.